3D in After Effects is so cool. We can create virtual worlds for our composites. We can add lights and cameras. We can add layers that cast shadows and interact with lights. We are in control of our set. A lot of the really cool effects that you see are created in After Effects 3D engine. So without anything further, let's get to it. The 3D engine in After Effects lets us see and manipulate our layers in the Z-axis. We can place layers and lights as well as cameras in this world and navigate through it for some really cool and photorealistic effects. I would like to start with the basics and show you how to convert a layer into a 3D layer. But before we do that, I would like to say that 3D in After Effects is not quite 3D. It is what in the industry is known as 2.5D, which means that even though we can move the layers in 3D space, we cannot make the layers themselves 3D. These layers have no depth, they are flat. Okay, let's go ahead and start a new composition. I'm gonna go and click on the new composition icon at the bottom of the project panel. And I'm just gonna call it 3D. And I'll make the background color black. And I'll click OK. Now I would like to create a new solid. The shortcut to create a new solid is Ctrl or Command Y. I'm going to name this layer 3D layer. And I do want it white, so I'll just click OK. Now I need to show the switches so that I can switch this to a 3D layer. So I can right click here and I can choose the switches column, and there it is. This cube shape icon is what represents the 3D layer. If I click on this checkbox right under that icon, my layer gets turned into a 3D layer and the composition panel itself shows that. We can see this layer from the camera view by default, but there are other views that we can have. For example, in here is the 3D view pop-up menu. I can click and I can select a view other than the active camera. I can view from the front, from the left, from the top, from the back, from the right, from the bottom, but the one that I like are the custom views. By default, I see it from this angle on Custom View 1. I can also grab my Unified Camera tool and I can change my view of this layer. This doesn't necessarily move or rotate the layer in space. It's just changing my view of it. Another thing that After Effects has to help us on our 3D work is that we can see more than one view. So if we go to this drop-down menu, we can select 2 views horizontal or vertical, 4 views, etc., etc. I'm going to choose 2 views horizontal. Notice that this one is highlighted because it has these yellow edges. And now I can click on this one and now the top is highlighted. This one says top, this one says Custom View 1. I can highlight any of these views and I can change it. I could, for example, view the camera view on the left and the custom view on the right. This helps tremendously when positioning things in 3D space. The tools that help us manipulate our view of the 3D layer are these here. The Unified Camera tool, the Orbit Camera tool, the Track XY Camera tool, and the Track Z Camera tool. The shortcut for them is always the letter C. So I can go ahead and rotate it. If I do this, I can press C to change to the next tool, C again to move yet to the last tool. These camera tools, even though they are manipulating or changing our view in the custom view, they constrain our motion. For example, this tool, which is the Track Z camera tool, lets us zoom in and out by just clicking and dragging up or down. The next tool, which is the Unified Camera tool, lets us manipulate by rotating, and if I use some shortcuts, I will be able to constrain the motion to side and up and down, and of course zooming in and zooming out. Is very useful. If I press and hold the Control key, that is the Z-Track camera tool, with the Shift I'm constrained in my rotating degrees. If I press and hold Command and Option, I'm actually moving the layer. It's not just my view that is changing, but I can actually move the layer in space. Now I'm going to go ahead and go back to just one view. And I'll make sure that it is the active camera view instead of the custom view. If we expand the transform properties of the layer, we're going to see that some things have been added. For example, for anchor point and position, we see values for X, Y, and Z. We see a new value for orientation, and of course we can rotate the layer on the X axis, the Y axis, and of course the Z axis. I'm going to go ahead and reset all of these values by clicking right here where it says Reset to the right of Transform. Now I go back to my default value. 3D layers are also special because I can add lights to the composition and these layers will be affected by it. To add a light, I'm going to go under Layer, New, Light. I can choose different types of light in here. I can choose a spotlight, a parallel, a point light, or ambient light. Parallel, spot, and point lights can give me shadows. Ambient lights, on the other hand, cannot give me shadows. I'll choose a spotlight and I will choose to cast shadows. Notice that I can change things like intensity, cone angle, and cone feather. I can also control how dark the shadow is and the diffusion of the shadow right here on the light parameters. Once I click OK, the light gets added to the composition. All of the parameters that we saw before are also available right here on the layer under the light options. I can change the light from spot to parallel, point, or ambient. I can change the color of the light by clicking here and changing it. I'll make it more orangey. The cone angle as well. That's how wide it's going to be. The feathering, make it really soft or really harsh. And of course, I can choose in here if I'm going to cast shadows or not, how dark the shadows will be, and how diffused they will be. I can also add more lights, and they will interact with each other. I'll collapse this light and I'm going to duplicate it. To duplicate a layer is Control or Command D. Now I have two lights that are identical. I'll press P for position and I'll move this one a little bit. I want you to notice that as I scrub this number, the light itself moves, but where the light is pointing towards is not moving. This is known as the point of interest of the light, and it is this value right here. I can move the point of interest of the light, which just kind of rotates the light, or I can move the light itself without moving the point of interest. And I can do that by scrubbing these numbers here. I'm going to switch to the selection tool. I can also manipulate the light by clicking and dragging right here on the comp panel. Notice that the lights have three arrows, one green, one red, and one blue. If I position my mouse pointer near the red one, I'm going to see near the mouse pointer the letter X, near the green the letter Y, and near the blue the letter Z. What happens is that if I click and drag while the letter X is showing, I will only be able to move my light from side to side. Y is just up and down, and of course Z is just to the front and to the back. Notice that the lights are interacting with each other. Where the two lights overlap right there is quite a bit brighter than when they don't overlap, like in here. Lights also mix in color, so if I change the color of one of the lights and then place them together, I'll get yet a third color. I'll collapse this light and I'm going to duplicate it again. I'm going to have a red light. I'll rename this one red. One green and one blue. I will change the color of the light to red on that one, to green on the other one, and of course to blue on the third one. I can also click directly on the light and move it in here. If the three lights become together on the RGB, notice that when they all three overlap, I'm getting white. This is because these lights are following the additive color scheme. So when you add all the colors at their maximum value, you get white. You can also add cameras to the composition. To add a camera, all you have to do is Layer, New, Camera. And from here you can choose from several presets. 15 millimeter, 20, 24, 50 is what I'm going to use. You can also change the zoom value, the angle view. You can also manually change all of these values. And now I'll click OK. As soon as I do that, there's a new layer named Camera 1 that gets added to the composition. I can manipulate this camera like I can manipulate any other layer. I'll expand it, and under the transform parameters, I'll see that I have a point of interest. Notice that now what seems to be moving are all of the layers. But not really. What is really moving is our point of view. We can manipulate the camera from this view or from custom view. If you manipulate the camera from the custom view, it is a good idea to have two views where you can see not only the view of the camera, so the camera view, which would be here right on the left, but you can see where the camera is and where you are manipulating it to. This really makes life much, much easier. I can zoom in, out, etc., etc. Notice that the camera angle, the camera location, and of course where it's pointing at is represented by these lines. I'll go back to a one view and I'll make it the active camera view. Just like with the lights, when we scrub the position values, the point of interest of the camera does not change. We can, however, change that manually here, or we can click and drag on the composition to move the camera and its point of interest. You can change this behavior if you select the camera and then go to Layer, Transform, Auto Orient. You can now tell the camera to orient towards the path, or we can just shot orientation off. By default, the camera will orient towards the point of interest.